This is the worst timing. My neighbor is doing woodwork in their garage. I don't know if we're gonna have any fix to this, but we're just gonna keep going.
So it occurred to me, maybe a simple analogy to an intersection might allow judges to better see Emma's dilemma. So if we think about this intersection, the roads to the intersection would be the way that the workforce was structured by race and by gender. And then the traffic in those roads would be the hiring policies and the other practices that ran through those roads. Now, because Emma was both black and female, she was positioned precisely where those roads overlapped, experiencing the simultaneous impact of the company's gender and race traffic. The law was like that ambulance that shows up and is ready to treat Emma only if it can be shown that she was harmed on the race road or on the gender road, but not where those roads intersected. So what do you call being impacted by multiple forces and then abandoned to fend for yourself? Intersectionality seemed to do it for me.
Some may deny the urgency, but it is dire that everyone takes the opportunity to learn ethnic studies and learn about intersectionality before it's too late. Kimberlé Crenshaw is a scholar on critical race theory and is a civil rights advocate. In this interview, she is discussing the term that she coined, intersectionality. The interviewer asks, "You originally coined the term intersectionality to describe bias and violence against Black women, but it's become more widely used for LGBTQ issues, among others. Is that a misunderstanding of intersectionality?" Crenshaw responds, "Intersectionality is a lens through which you can see where power comes and collides, where it interlocks and intersects. It's not simply that there's a race problem here, a gender problem here, and a class or LGBTQ problem there. Many times, that framework erases what happens to people who are subject to all of those things. Some people look to intersectionality as a grand theory of everything, but that's not my intention. If someone is trying to think about how to explain to the courts why they should not dismiss a case made by Black women, just because the employer did hire Blacks who were men and women who were white, well, that's what the tool was designed to do. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, it's not like you have to use this concept." So this is including the context of what made her coin the term intersectionality and what has made her build this framework. She talks about it on this TED Talk.
Now, communications experts tell us that when facts do not fit with the available frames, people have a difficult time incorporating new facts into their way of thinking about a problem. As a consequence, reporters don't lead with them, policymakers don't think about them, and politicians aren't encouraged or demanded that they speak to them. Without frames that allow us to see how social problems impact all the members of a targeted group, many will fall through the cracks of our movements, left to suffer in virtual isolation. But it doesn't have to be this way. Many years ago, I began to use the term intersectionality to deal with the fact that many of our social justice problems like racism and sexism are often overlapping, creating multiple levels of social injustice. Now, the experience that gave rise to intersectionality was my chance encounter with a woman named Emma de Graffenried. Emma de Graffenried was an African-American woman, a working wife, and a mother. I actually read about Emma's story from the pages of a legal opinion written by a judge who had dismissed Emma's claim of race and gender discrimination against a local car manufacturing plant. She applied for a job, and she was not hired, and she believed that she was not hired because she was a Black woman. Now, the judge in question dismissed Emma's suit. And the argument for dismissing the suit was that the employer did hire African Americans, and the employer hired women. The real problem, though, that the judge was not willing to acknowledge was what Emma was actually trying to say, that the African Americans that were hired, usually for industrial jobs, maintenance jobs, were all men. And the women that were hired, usually for secretarial or front office work, were all white. Only if the court was able to see how these policies came together would he be able to see the double discrimination that Emma de Graffenried was facing. But the court refused to allow Emma to put two causes of action together to tell her story because he believed that by allowing her to do that, she would be able to have preferential treatment. She'd have an advantage by being able to have two swings at the bat when African American men and white women only had one swing at the bat. But of course, neither African American men or white women needed to combine a race and gender discrimination claim to tell the story of the discrimination they were experiencing. Why wasn't the real unfairness law's refusal to protect African American women simply because their experiences weren't exactly the same as white women and African American men? Rather than broadening the frame to include African American women, the court simply tossed their case completely out of court. There was no name for this problem. And we all know that where there's no name for a problem, you can't see a problem. And when you can't see a problem, you pretty much can't solve it.
So we're going to talk about why intersectionality matters. Intersectionality matters because it allows us to empathize and humanize one another. Every aspect of someone's identity can amplify one's privilege or one's feelings of marginalization. It is important for us to be considerate of one another. Assume that there is a context to a person beyond what we are able to perceive. You need to empathize with your community, which is filled with people from different backgrounds and experiences that may vary based on the demographics of your region. But the people you're around aren't monolithic either, so there's always something new to learn with the people that you surround yourself with. I often introduce myself as a brown, queer, neurodivergent woman. These are my intersectional identities. Every part of my identity contributes to a uniquely liminal experience. Nonetheless, I am not alone in my struggle. Let me explain. There's a Venn diagram that I have that I would like to show you guys. I learned this in my Asian American Studies class, specifically the one for Filipino Americans. And it was the first time I was ever exposed to the idea of a liminal space. And as an Asian American, I don't really resonate with the term American by itself, and I don't resonate with the identity of Asian by itself either because I didn't grow up in Asia. So I am in this in-between liminal space of a Venn diagram where I am Asian American and Filipino American. There are many people that I've met with many different intersectional identities, but we all share a collective struggle. And what is the struggle against? All the isms, of course: capitalism, imperialism, racism, colorism, sexism, fascism, and unfortunately the list goes on. And when we're faced with these social issues, we often wonder two things. One, how did we get here? Two, who can I turn to? Or what can I turn to? As someone who studied Asian American studies in college, that's the ethnic studies that I feel most comfortable talking about because it's what I studied. Ooh, good. The noise went away. I don't know if you noticed, but a lot more peaceful for me. Oh, great. I'm a second-generation Asian American born in the United States. I studied communication and sociology in undergrad and minored in Asian American studies. I have been reading a book by two professors, Diane C. Fugino and Robin M. Rodriguez, who went and or taught at my alma mater. And their book is called Contemporary Asian American Activism: Building Movements for Liberation. It's a book that they edited together. This book is a contemporary collection of written works archiving moments in Asian American history. Arising out of the Asian American movement of the 1960s and 70s, the AAM was a new identity, one that was, as Yen Lei's Spiritu shows, a political identity and a strategic move against group-based racism that treated Asian ethnic groups as interchangeable. The Asian American identity is a unique one. Though we are not a monolith, we share this struggle as people of color and have been harmed institutionally through things like the propaganda of the model minority myth. Historically, white Americans have scapegoated Chinese immigrants and used the Chinese ethnicity as a monolithic category to describe all Asians. This is especially prominent in the 1800s when Chinese immigrants came to the gold rush in California and helped with building the Transcontinental Railroad. By the way, all my sources will be in the description. If you take a look at this timeline, we can measure race and ethnicity across the decades from 1790 to 2010. And there's A couple things that I'm going to point out. There's a couple things I want to point out. Alright, so what is Asian American Studies? We have Black and Asian American activists to thank for the existence of ethnic studies. The 5 to 6 month strike that occurred, known as the SF State College strike, also referred to as the Third World Strike, was essential to the establishment of the country's first College of Ethnic Studies. This took place in the late 1960s to early 70s, which was a major time for civil rights movements and activism in the United States. As an Asian American Studies minor myself, this movement outcome has made generational impacts. 4 decades later, it allowed me to add this minor to my degree. And I can confidently say that most of what I know of Asian American Studies doesn't come from K through 12. It came from higher education, which is a huge barrier to entry to those who want to learn Asian American Studies, or just to anyone who wants to learn their own history or ethnic studies in general. And that's why I want to build a channel like this that educates people about ethnic studies, and specifically my specialty will be in Asian American Studies, but the humanities isn't getting the attention or the respect it needs, and because of that, we are repeating history. So this is why learning things like intersectionality is important, so we can empathize with one another and really be with our community. We're not fighting against each other, we're fighting together. Class solidarity, y'all. That's important. How does intersectionality affect Asian Americans? We're all impacted by intersectionality. We all have intersecting identities that shape our overlapping experiences. But when we don't get to learn about each other's perspectives and histories, we are doomed by our own ignorance and complacency. Without an understanding of intersectionality, we are doomed to be silent and marginalized. A big focus of Asian American scholar activism, according to professors Fagino and Rodriguez, was an institutional transformation. The Asian American Movement, or AAM, of the 1960s and 70s took a lot of inspiration from the Black Power movements, and their emphasis on collective leadership models and self-sustaining community-based policies and institutions. Understanding intersectionality requires us to have empathy. When we have empathy, we have the power to love and uplift one another in our communities and our relationships. This is especially important in times of political strife and turmoil. So, what does this mean today? According to MSN, the University of California and high schools throughout the state are reconsidering the eligibility of ethnic core studies. Just like attacks on CRT, which is critical race theory, and DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, in recent years have shown, ethnic studies itself could be at risk. So here are a couple quotes from the MSN article covering the issue. According to Richard Sander, a law professor at UCLA, and Matt Malkin, an astronomy professor at UCLA, they wrote in this letter, requiring such a course, ethnic studies course, would entangle the university in sorts of political and ideological disputes over ethnic studies course content that are currently roiling school districts across the state and the nation. It sounds like you're just afraid to face the true histories. A lot of these ethnic studies courses want to acknowledge Black and Indigenous histories and the activism that they had to go through due to the institutional suppression and oppression that they faced. Why is that controversial? Co-lead writers UC Riverside teaching professor Wallace Cleaves and UC Santa Cruz critical race and ethnic studies and literature professor Christine Hong explain the intent of the criteria by saying, ethnic studies is aimed at producing critical knowledge about power, inequality, and inequity, as well as the efforts of marginalized and oppressed racialized peoples to challenge systemic violence and the institutional structures that perpetuate racial injustice. Let me be clear. I have a lot of professors who are radical thinkers. However, the educational institution in the United States is currently, as we can see in the Ivy League schools right now, and even in the UC schools, a lot of them are complicit in genocide. And I'd like to separate the institutional aspects of those universities from the professors who are actively supporting students of color and protecting their students and advocating for human rights. The reason I'm able to make videos like this and why I would want to continue make videos like this is because I was given the proper education from educators who are passionate about their subject matter and who know the importance of humanities. There is a quote criticizing these ethnic studies courses, saying it is quote-unquote fundamentally wrong and inconsistent with the very spirit of a university to mandate courses that are framed by an ideology, whether that ideology comes from the left or from the right, which is utter BS, because you were supposed to learn about different ideologies in college. I learned so many different perspectives in college. It's important to have these different perspectives, or else you're just going to be biased. And when you uphold the white supremacist narrative, you're upholding white supremacy. In the Bay Area, a Palo Alto school board caused a stir because of a proposed course that aims to cover topics like displacement of Native Americans and the Black Panthers' role in the civil rights movement. People are threatened by American history. What's the point of preserving already whitewashed curriculum if not to uphold white supremacy? Why is it so threatening to learn about the history of BIPOC people in this country, even in one of the most liberal states? When we erase history, we are doomed to repeat it. The government is actively suppressing marginalized people. Fear and ignorance are their weapons. That's why it's important to not only learn Asian American history, but all American history and all these ethnic course studies. It is important to have an intersectional understanding of all of these so you can understand the unique struggles and the collective struggles that we all experience and how we got here. Now, there's only so much I can include in one video, but I hope I can continue to make this channel an educational platform, an inspiring platform, one that radicalizes and hopefully resonates with people. I would like to make more educational content and posts, and specifically content about Asian American history, specifically from a sociological perspective, but also as a communication major, I'm really fascinated by media and film, so we'll hopefully get to cover some of that. I also have a niche interest in Asian American representation in media, so we'll be having a lot of conversations about the socio-political climate of today through a sociological lens, and I hope y'all enjoyed that, and I'd love to have conversations in the comments below. Please be kind to one another, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye, everyone.